You're listening to the Prime Entertainment Network.
Welcome to the Prime Entertainment Network. Hi, my name's Tony Carbone, and along with my co-host, Mr. Cliff West, we are joined by someone who promoted those classic Motown records throughout the 60s and 70s, Mr. Gene Skirdy. Gene promoted records from Marvin Gaye, Gladys Knight, The Temptations, The Supremes, Edwin Starr, and so many others. Gene, it's so good to have you. Thanks for coming by the Prime Entertainment Network. How you been?
How are you, Tony? Pleasure to be here.
Gene, what years did you actually work for Motown?
I worked for Motown locally in Boston from 1965 through 1969. And then from there, from 1969 to 1975, I went out to Detroit.
Oh, so you worked there for a good 10 years. That's pretty good.
That's right.
Gene, when did you get started in the record business?
Cliff, I got my start in the record business in 1954. I started in radio, working at a station called WCOP, which is no longer in existence. I happened to be going to school for printing, and one day I was walking through Boston, and I went in to see a gentleman called Stan Richards, who was a disc jockey there, who kept inviting people to go in and see him. I went in, never left.
And what were your everyday duties, Gene, that you had to do on a daily basis?
My everyday duties would report to Gordon Prince on all 45s, sales, from radio stations and from distributors and from different areas of where our records were selling and how were they selling and why the shipments were low and what stations did not want to play it for what reason. Some stations wouldn't play a record because a certain area wasn't playing it, like Washington would be playing something, and maybe Texas might pick up on it later, depending on how high it is in Billboard or Cashbox. And as you go along, you find that a lot of the radio stations are very fussy because they're afraid to take that shot. Because at the time things were happening, payola had already ended, and that was a big thing at the time, and people were afraid to play certain records because of payola. It meant a lot to these radio stations.
Gene, I'm interested. Who did you have to report to, interact with, or who were the superiors at promotions?
Gordon Prince was my main man at the office, and Gordon would take a trip. He'd be out of town. He'd call me, and I'd have to give him the information of all the areas that we had our independent distributors, and they'd call me to let me know what was happening with Gladys Knight's. I heard it through the grapevine. Why is it that Gladys is working here but not working there? What do we need to do? And Gordon would call me to find out who it was I spoke with, where it was happening. It may be a small station, but that small station could probably give it that shot into whatever's going to happen with a major station.
Were you in much contact with Berry Gordy? Did you get to know the man, or did you get to meet him at all?
Tony, I was in contact with Berry Gordy. I was sitting in my office, and I had just started with Motown in Detroit, and Gordon was out of the office, and the phone rang. So, of course, who had to pick the phone up? Me. So I picked the phone up as hello. Gordon had singles, Gordon Prince's office. He says, Gordy says to me, he says, who am I speaking with? I says, it's Gene Skirdy. I says, who am I speaking with? He says, Berry Gordy Jr. So I called him Berry. He says, Gene, how you doing? I said, fine, Berry. He says, I'm calling to find out about the Marvin Gaye record. I says, we're not getting much right now, Mr. Gordy. Berry, rather. And I says, the record is not taking off in the areas that we'd like to see it take off, and we're just waiting to see what happens. Gordon is in New York at Billboard magazine. He went to see the guys there. And things are slow right now, I says, and Marvin Gaye is the slowest one right now. He says, Gene, thank you for your information. He was nice about it, you know. We both were nice to each other. But you know something? It was like, whoo.
All right, well, we'll be back in just a minute with more of our interview with Gene Skirdy. So please, stay with us.
You're listening to the Prime Entertainment Network.
Our mission at the Prime Entertainment Network is to provide our clients with a podcasting forum to fully inform their customers as to the products and services that they offer without the restrictions of a 60-second radio ad, a 30-second TV spot, or even a 2-inch print ad.
Here at the Prime Entertainment Network, or the Pen as we call it, the client is interviewed in a radio talk show style in which they get the opportunity to tell the whole story of their business in a thoughtful, informative, and entertaining way.
Podcasts typically last between 6 to 8 minutes in length, but can be longer or shorter if desired.
That's right, Cliff. Also, you can have your podcast linked to your website, uploaded to the iTunes Store, or any other sites that post podcasts.
The Prime Entertainment Network is your answer to telling your story your way.
Let's hear what you're all about.
So get on the pen and tell the world.
Okay, we're back here at the Prime Entertainment Network, and we're continuing our interview with Gene Skirty, former promotion man for Motown. And Cliff, I believe you have a question.
Yes. Were you in direct contact with any of the artists?
Not all the time. I had a couple of artists I was in direct contact with. One was Edwin Starr, who happened to be a great guy. He's passed on. But I'll tell you something, I loved him, because when Edwin Starr had War and 25 Miles going, he had some great things going, and he was a funny cat.
So what other artists did you get to know on a personal level besides Edwin?
Cliff, Jimmy Ruffin, one of my favorite. Jimmy and I used to go out to lunch together a lot. And Jimmy Ruffin was David Ruffin's brother. And he was one of these guys that was really calm and collective and had it together. And a nice guy. And we used to enjoy each other's company. I'd kind of miss him. I think of him a lot.
I'm sure you do, Gene. When Motown went out to L.A., did you go with them, or did you stay back in Detroit?
No, I didn't, Tony. I stayed here or stayed back there in Detroit, because at that time, Barry was about the only one that went out there with a couple of other people, and they were just fixing the offices up and everything else. So, main office is still Detroit.
Gene, what actually led you to the field of record promotion? How'd you get into it?
When I was working in a radio station, WNAC, as a music director, there was a gentleman upstairs in a hotel. See, we used to be right next door to a hotel called the Buckminster. And there was a gentleman who was a disc jockey at the time named Ed Penny. He went into independent promotion. And his office was right upstairs over my office where I used to work at WNAC as a music director. One day I went up to see him. And we used to bowl together anyway, but I went up to see him, and I really got interested in him looking at it. I says, you know, Ed, I said, I'd like to try it. He said, well, you can try it. He said, you got a little experience, you know your background and all that, but I couldn't do both. I couldn't be a music director, and I couldn't be a promotion man because it was interfering with both jobs. But that's how I started, by talking with him, and I'm glad I did.
Gene, as you see it, how has the record business changed, say, from your days in Motown to the record business of today?
Very much, a lot. I don't know what really they do today, to be honest with you, okay? Because I've lost contact with it, and that's should happen. It's a long time ago. But when we were doing promotion, when we were doing all of that, we would get 100 singles, which you don't hear of singles anymore. They're all CDs. And we'd mail them out to all of our radio stations along with the albums or whatever. And then we follow up with our own singles to each radio station and talk with every dependent music director that was in the station. It was good.
Thanks a lot, Gene.
Thank you.
And you've been listening to the Prime Entertainment Network's interview with Gene Skirty, former promotion man from Motown Records. So check back with us next time for part 2. This is Tony Carbone saying thanks for listening, and we'll see you again right here at the Prime Entertainment Network.
You've been listening to the Prime Entertainment Network.